Section 3 of Tales of Unrest. Chapter 3 of Karain, A Memory. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Zhu. Tales of Unrest by Joseph Conrad. Karain, A Memory. Chapter 3. For 2 years, at short intervals, we visited him. We came to like him, to trust him, almost to admire him. He was plotting and preparing a war with patience, with foresight, with a fidelity to his purpose, and with a steadfastness of which I would have thought him racially incapable. He seemed fearless of the future, and in his plans displayed a sagacity that was only limited by his profound ignorance of the rest of the world. We tried to enlighten him, but our attempts to make clear the irresistible nature of the forces which he desired to arrest failed to discourage his eagerness to strike a blow for his own primitive ideas. He did not understand us, and replied by arguments that almost drove one to desperation by their childish shrewdness. He was absurd and unanswerable. Sometimes we caught glimpses of a sombre glowing fury within him, a brooding and vague sense of wrong, and a concentrated lust of violence which is dangerous in a native. He raved like one inspired. On one occasion, after we had been talking to him late in his campong, he jumped up. A great clear fire blazed in the grove. Lights and shadows danced together between the trees. In the still night bats flitted in and out of the boughs, like fluttering flakes of denser darkness. He snatched the sword from the old man, whizzed it out of the scabbard, and thrust the point into the earth. Upon the thin upright blade the silver hilt, released, swayed before him like something alive. He stepped back a pace, and in a deadened tone spoke fiercely to the vibrating steel. If there is virtue in the fire, in the iron, in the hand that forged thee, in the words spoken over thee, in the desire of my heart, and in the wisdom of thy makers, then shall we be victorious together. He drew it out, looked along the edge. Take, he said over his shoulder to the old sword bearer. The other, unmoved on his hams, wiped the point with a corner of his sarong, and returning the weapon to its scabbard, sat nursing it on his knees without a single look upwards. Karain, suddenly very calm, reseated himself with dignity. We gave up remonstrating after this, and let him go his way to an honourable disaster. All we could do for him was to see to it that the powder was good for the money, and the rifles serviceable if old. But the game was becoming at last too dangerous, and if we, who had faced it pretty often, thought little of the danger, it was decided for us by some very respectable people sitting safely in counting houses that the risks were too great, and that only one more trip could be made. After giving in the usual way many misleading hints as to our destination, we slipped away quietly, and after a very quick passage entered the bay. It was early morning, and even before the anchor went to the bottom, the schooner was surrounded by boats. The first thing we heard was that Karains mysterious sword bearer had died a few days ago. We did not attach much importance to the news. It was certainly difficult to imagine Karain without his inseparable follower, but the fellow was old. He had never spoken to one of us. We hardly ever had heard the sound of his voice, and we had come to look upon him as upon something inanimate, as a part of our friend's trappings of state, like that sword he carried, or the fringed red umbrella displayed during an official progress. Karain did not visit us in the afternoon as usual. A message of greeting and a present of fruit and vegetables came off for us before sunset. Our friend paid us like a banker, but treated us like a prince. We sat up for him till midnight. Under the stern awning bearded Jackson jingled an old guitar and sang, with an execrable accent, Spanish love songs, while young Hollis and I, sprawling on the deck, had a game of chess by the light of a cargo lantern. Karain did not appear. Next day we were busy unloading, and heard that the Rajah was unwell. The expected invitation to visit him ashore did not come. We sent friendly messages, but fearing to intrude upon some secret council, remained on board. Early on the third day we had landed all the powder and rifles, and also a 6-pounder brass gun with its carriage, which we had subscribed together for a present for our friend. The afternoon was sultry. Ragged edges of black clouds peeped over the hills, and invisible thunderstorms circled outside, growling like wild beasts. We got the schooner ready for sea, intending to leave next morning at daylight. All day a merciless sun blazed down into the bay, fierce and pale, as if at white heat. Nothing moved on the land. The beach was empty. The villages seemed deserted. The trees far off stood in unstirring clumps, as if painted. The white smoke of some invisible bushfire spread itself low over the shores of the bay like a settling fog. Late in the day 3 of Karains chief men, dressed in their best and armed to the teeth, came off in a canoe, bringing a case of dollars. They were gloomy and languid, and told us they had not seen their Rajah for 5 days. No one had seen him. We settled all accounts, and after shaking hands in turn and in profound silence, they descended one after another into their boat, and were paddled to the shore, sitting close together, clad in vivid colours, with hanging heads. The gold embroideries of their jackets flashed dazzlingly as they went away, gliding on the smooth water, and not one of them looked back once. Before sunset the growling clouds carried with a rush the ridge of hills, and came tumbling down the inner slopes. Everything disappeared. Black whirling vapours filled the bay, and in the midst of them the schooner swung here and there in the shifting gusts of wind. A single clap of thunder detonated in the hollow with a violence that seemed capable of bursting into small pieces the ring of high land, and a warm deluge descended. The wind died out. We panted in the close cabin, our faces streamed. The bay outside hissed as if boiling. The water fell in perpendicular shafts, as heavy as lead. It swished about the deck, poured off the spars, gurgled, sobbed, splashed, murmured in the blind night. Our lamp burned low. Hollis, stripped to the waist, lay stretched out on the lockers with closed eyes and motionless like a despoiled corpse. At his head Jackson twanged the guitar, and gasped out in sighs a mournful dirge about hopeless love and eyes like stars. Then we heard startled voices on deck, crying in the rain, hurried footsteps overhead, and suddenly Karain appeared in the doorway of the cabin. His bare breast and his face glistened in the light, his sarong, soaked, clung about his legs. He had his sheathed kriss in his left hand, and wisps of wet hair escaping from under his red kerchief stuck over his eyes and down his cheeks. He stepped in with a headlong stride, and looking over his shoulder like a man pursued. Hollis turned on his side quickly and opened his eyes. Jackson clapped his big hand over the strings, and the jingling vibration died suddenly. I stood up. We didn't hear your boat's hail, I exclaimed. Boat? The man swam off, drawled out Hollis from the locker. Look at him. He breathed heavily, wild-eyed, while we looked at him in silence. Water dripped from him, made a dark pool and ran crookedly across the cabin floor. We could hear Jackson, who had gone out to drive away our Malay seamen, from the doorway of the companion. He swore menacingly in the patter of a heavy shower, and there was a great commotion on deck. The watchmen, scared out of their wits by the glimpse of a shadowy figure leaping over the rail, straight out of the night as it were, had alarmed all hands. Then Jackson, with glittering drops of water on his hair and beard, came back looking angry, and Hollis, who being the youngest of us assumed an indolent superiority, said without stirring, Give him a dry sarong. Give him mine. It's hanging up in the bathroom. Karain laid the crease on the table, hilt inwards, and murmured a few words in a strangled voice. Whats that? asked Hollis, who had not heard. He apologizes for coming in with a weapon in his hand, I said dazedly. Ceremonious beggar! Tell him we forgive a friend on such a night, drawled out Hollis. Whats wrong? Karain slipped the dry sarong over his head, dropped the wet one at his feet, and stepped out of it. I pointed to the wooden armchair, his armchair. He sat down very straight, said Ha! in a strong voice. A short shiver shook his broad frame. He looked over his shoulder uneasily, turned as if to speak to us, but only stared in a curious blind manner, and again looked back. Jackson bellowed out, Watch well on deck there! Heard a faint answer from above, and reaching out with his foot, slammed to the cabin door. All right now, he said. Karains lips moved slightly. A vivid flash of lightning made the two round stern ports facing him glimmer like a pair of cruel and phosphorescent eyes. The flame of the lamp seemed to wither into brown dust for an instant, and the looking glass over the little sideboard leaped out behind his back in a smooth sheet of livid light. The roll of thunder came near, crashed over us. The schooner trembled, and the great voice went on, threatening terribly into the distance. For less than a minute a furious shower rattled on the decks. Karain looked slowly from face to face, and then the silence became so profound that we all could hear distinctly the two chronometers in my cabin ticking along with unflagging speed against one another. And we three, strangely moved, could not take our eyes from him. He had become enigmatical and touching, in virtue of that mysterious cause that had driven him through the night and through the thunderstorm to the shelter of the schooner's cuddy. Not one of us doubted that we were looking at a fugitive. Incredible as it appeared to us, he was haggard as though he had not slept for weeks. He had become lean as though he had not eaten for days. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes sunk, the muscles of his chest and arms twitched slightly, as if after an exhausting contest. Of course it had been a long swim off to the schooner, but his face showed another kind of fatigue, the tormented weariness, the anger and the fear of a struggle against a thought, an idea, against something that cannot be grappled, that never rests, a shadow, a nothing, unconquerable and immortal, that preys upon life. We knew it as though he had shouted it at us. His chest expanded time after time, as if it could not contain the beating of his heart. For a moment he had the power of the possessed, the power to awaken in the beholders wonder, pain, pity, and a fearful near sense of things invisible, of things dark and mute that surround the loneliness of mankind. His eyes roamed aimlessly for a moment, then became still. He said with effort, I came here. I leaped out of my stockade as after a defeat. I ran in the night. The water was black. I left him calling on the edge of black water. I left him standing alone on the beach. I swam. He called out after me. I swam. He trembled from head to foot, sitting very upright and gazing straight before him. Left whom? Who called? We didn't know. We could not understand. I said at all hazards, Be firm. The sound of my voice seemed to steady him into a sudden rigidity, but otherwise he took no notice. He seemed to listen, to expect something for a moment, then went on He cannot come here. Therefore I sought you, you men with white faces who despise the invisible voices. He cannot abide your unbelief and your strength. He was silent for a while, then exclaimed softly, Oh, the strength of unbelievers! There's no one here but you and we three, said Hollis quietly. He reclined with his head supported on elbow and didn't budge. I know, said Karain. He has never followed me here. Was not the wise man ever by my side? But since the old wise man who knew of my trouble has died, I have heard the voice every night. I shut myself up for many days in the dark. I can hear the sorrowful murmurs of women, the whisper of the wind, of the running waters, the clash of weapons in the hands of faithful men, their footsteps, and his voice. Near, so, in my ear. I felt him near. His breath passed over my neck. I leaped out without a cry. All about me men slept quietly. I ran to the sea. He ran by my side without footsteps, whispering, whispering old words, whispering into my ear in his old voice. I ran into the sea. I swam off to you with my crease between my teeth. I, armed, I fled before a breath. To you. Take me away to your land. The wise old man has died, and with him is gone the power of his words and charms. And I can tell no one, no one. There is no one here faithful enough and wise enough to know. It is only near you, unbelievers, that my trouble fades like a mist under the eye of day. He turned to me. With you I go, he cried in a contained voice. With you, who knows so many of us. I want to leave this land, my people, and him there. He pointed a shaking finger at random over his shoulder. It was hard for us to bear the intensity of that undisclosed distress. Hollis stared at him hard. I asked gently, Where is the danger? Everywhere outside this place, he answered mournfully. In every place where I am. He waits for me on the paths, under the trees, in the place where I sleep. Everywhere but here. He looked round the little cabin, at the painted beams, at the tarnished varnish of bulkheads. He looked round as if appealing to all its shabby strangeness, to the disorderly jumble of unfamiliar things that belong to an inconceivable life of stress, of power, of endeavour, of unbelief, to the strong life of white men, which rolls on irresistible and hard on the edge of outer darkness. He stretched out his arms as if to embrace it and us. We waited. The wind and rain had ceased, and the stillness of the night round the schooner was as dumb and complete as if a dead world had been laid to rest in a grave of clouds. We expected him to speak. The necessity within him tore at his lips. There are those who say that a native will not speak to a white man. Error. No man will speak to his master, but to a wanderer and a friend, to him who does not come to teach or to rule, to him who asks for nothing and accepts all things. Words are spoken by the campfires, in the shared solitude of the sea, in riverside villages, in resting places surrounded by forests. Words are spoken that take no account of race or colour. One heart speaks, another one listens, and the earth, the sea, the sky, the passing wind and the stirring leaf hear also the futile tale of the burden of life. He spoke at last. It is impossible to convey the effect of his story. It is undying, it is but a memory, and its vividness cannot be made clear to another mind, any more than the vivid emotions of a dream. One must have seen his innate splendour, one must have known him before, looked at him then. The wavering gloom of the little cabin, the breathless stillness outside, through which only the lapping of water against the schooner's sides could be heard. Hollis's pale face, with steady dark eyes, the energetic head of Jackson held up between two big palms, and with the long yellow hair of his beard flowing over the strings of the guitar lying on the table. Karain's upright and motionless pose, his tone, all this made an impression that cannot be forgotten. He faced us across the table. His dark head and bronze torso appeared above the tarnished slab of wood, gleaming and still, as if cast in metal. Only his lips moved, and his eyes glowed, went out, blazed again, or stared mournfully. His expressions came straight from his tormented heart. His words sounded low, in a sad murmur as of running water. At times they rang loud like the clash of a war gong, or trailed slowly like weary travellers, or rushed forward with the speed of fear. End of chapter 3 of Karain, a Memory.